This took place when I was 19 years old in the summer of 2015. I'm a female, and this is by far the scariest encounter I've had. A few years back, I was diagnosed with emphysema due to me being stupid and smoking too much at a young age. It's basically a lung condition where the air sacs in the lungs are damaged or weak, creating large air spaces instead of many smaller ones. I'd often have various episodes where I had trouble breathing, coughing, and shortness of breath. Needless to say, I've had several episodes throughout my teen years and was going to the emergency room at least once a month, and although these were acute episodes, they were still serious. I was spending the night at the hospital due to a really bad episode I was having. I was having trouble breathing, which ended up with me being put on a ventilator. There was only one night nurse at the time checking 20 plus rooms, so she barely checked up on me unless I really needed medical attention. Once in a while, she'd bring me food and water if I needed it, but that was really it. It was around midnight, and my mom, who was watching over me, had left for the night as visitor hours ended at 11 and wouldn't be back till the following day. So I'm on the hospital bed trying to focus on breathing while bored out of my mind. The unit of the hospital I was in didn't have many staff on duty, so it was expectedly quiet in the hallways. I'm watching the news on the TV they had, when I thought I could hear something coming from down the hall. At first, I immediately thought that it was the nurse coming to check up on me, but I instead saw some guy. Now, I would have assumed that he was just another visitor, but as I mentioned before, visitor hours were over, so there was no reason as to why he should have been in here. He was slightly tall with a medium build and wore a plaid t-shirt with some cargo pants. He looked nervous and then started looking at me and gave me an unsettling smile that I still can't shake off. He then pulled a knife out from his back pocket and I shit you not, he started cutting the wires that were connected to the ventilator. Sparks began to shoot out left and right and he eventually ran off back out the door and into the hallway. Unable to scream or call for help, I started crying and thank God another nurse came in the room. When he saw what had happened, he immediately put me on a stretcher and transferred me to another room with another ventilator. I remember falling asleep after that and waking up the next morning to my mom and two other nurses beside me. They had explained to my mom that a man had come into the hospital and somehow snuck past the front desk and eventually into the rooms for the patients. It's unclear whether or not he was a visitor, but this was truly a horrifying experience to encounter. I'm now 24 and I quit smoking for good and am fully recovered.
In 2013, I was working at a hospital and I just graduated from university. I'd recently gotten my master's degree in nursing, so I was pretty experienced with stuff like this, which is why I got the job as a nurse. Basically, what I do for most of my time would be to go and check up on the patients who needed assistance. This job was easy for the most part. I'd check up on the patients every hour, provide food, help them sleep, have a conversation with them, and just try to help them, as not only was it my job, but it was also the right thing to do. I've never really encountered anything strange or abnormal in all my time of working here. But there was this one time when I encountered something that really freaked me out. I had just finished checking up on all the patients when I walk out of the room and see an old woman out in the hallway. From my perspective, she was indeed a patient, but I had never seen her before, and there was no reason why she should have been out here. "Excuse me, ma'am," I yelled out. "It's late now. Would you please get back to your room?" However, she didn't respond to me. She simply walked into the women's restroom. I decided to follow her and turn on the lights, but there was no sign of her anywhere, and there were a lot of places to hide in here. Eventually, I dismissed it as me just seeing things and continued my shift. The next day, I was talking to a colleague named Abigail, who happened to sometimes work with me on the same floor. She seemed sad about something, and so I asked her what was wrong. She said that a couple of days ago, sometime in the morning, a patient who she really connected with had died due to a heart attack. I, for some reason, asked to see a picture, and when she showed me what she looked like, I nearly screamed. It was the exact same woman who I saw walking in the hallway last night. She seemed to pick up on the fact that I was shocked, and so I told her what I saw the other night, which in turn freaked her out a bit as well. Till this day, I strongly believe what I saw that night was completely paranormal.
For some context, I'm a 25-year-old female and I've been working at my city's hospital for transport for the past couple of years. It can be a chill and sometimes difficult job, but it begins to grow on you over time the longer you work. I work the night shift, so it's not too common for the department I worked for to be packed. I liked working the late shifts as they were mostly slow and much more relaxed. For most nights, you'd have some patients come in for something minor like physical pain or breathing problems. If we got patients who had severe problems like a broken leg or internal bleeding, we'd have to take them to urgent care or the ER. In fact, some can't even make it into the city, so we'd sometimes have the emergency stars helicopter have to drop in once in a while. I've seen some pretty intense things in my whole time working at the hospital. Everything from patients having trouble breathing all the way to people going into a coma. This one particular night, however, I witnessed something I would never forget. It was a slow night as usual, and I was talking with my aide about a patient's chart when somebody walked in through the main doors. My aide had left to go check up on a patient, and I was the only one at the front desk. There was a man. He wore a black shirt, a pair of gym shorts, which didn't make sense as this was during the winter and it was freezing cold outside. He looked to be middle-aged, maybe in his mid-30s, but he looked like crap, almost homeless. Messy, unkempt hair, a torn shirt, and smelled like marijuana. His eyes were red and his face was pale, and he looked like he didn't even know what he was doing. The hospital was located in a not-so-great area of my city, so you'd have your occasional creeps come in once in a while. Most of the time, people like this would be high on something and complain about constant dizziness or fibromyalgia from the drugs. He mumbled to me that he had a, quote, very bad headache and couldn't control it. I could smell the alcohol in his breath, and as much as I wanted to kick him out, our policy stated that we must care for someone who comes in no matter what. Needless to say, I tell him to sit down in one of the chairs in the waiting area, which is right in front of the emergency room. As he turned around to walk toward the waiting area, I noticed something sticking out of his back pocket, and it only took me a few seconds to realize that it was a knife. I didn't want to make it seem like I noticed, and the only security guard that was supposed to be on duty was on his break. The guy then started making strange noises while fidgeting and talking to himself. I had my eyes practically glued to him, and I was just hoping one of my coworkers would come out and call the police as I couldn't page anyone. This guy was big and tall, so there was no way I could fight him off even if I tried. Thankfully, the aide who was working with me had came out and I texted him the whole ordeal. With a shocked look, he steps outside and calls the police, and they thankfully arrive within 5 minutes and arrest the man. The man tried to resist, but it didn't work as he was completely wasted. Now this is the part that still freaks me out. Apparently, an hour before he had came in, he had stabbed somebody in the pelvis working at a gas station. Police had told us that this guy was arrested before for sexual assault and battery. He was charged and was put in jail for 15 years, which in my opinion got the crime. I still work in the same hospital, and nothing has happened ever since.
I work at the Royal Alexandra Hospital in Edmonton, Alberta. Growing up, I was a bit of a rebellious tough kid who always found himself getting into trouble. I'll get back to what I experienced at the hospital, but I first have to bring up an experience in my youth as it ties this all together. I used to hang out with questionable people, drugs, theft, vandalism, you name it. Anyway, we're all at a skate park that resides under a bridge, getting high and fooling around, when my best friend Jesse suddenly starts having a seizure and begins foaming at the mouth. It was terrifying, as in my messed up state, I didn't even realize what was going on for a moment. Then he stops breathing and begins to convulse. At this point, everyone starts freaking out, and soon after, an ambulance was called in. While most of the people split to avoid the cops, I stayed and held my friend in my arms. They couldn't save him in time. I was deeply devastated by the loss of Jesse, but that experience is what made me take my step towards getting clean and turning my life around. You're probably wondering why I bring up this story. Well, last week, a patient was brought into the ICU. He suffered an opioid overdose, but we managed to bring him back with a Narcan injection. But here's the crazy part. Before we managed to administer Noxolone, I briefly saw something that I saw when my friend passed away. A shadow. A figureless, shaped shadow that sort of loomed over him. When Jesse died, I couldn't get it out of my head. Back then, I thought it was something I hallucinated during my bad trip. But now, I think of it as something else. I now believe that shadow to be the demons that we give into. I'm now a man of God, so many may be quick to dismiss me, but perhaps there's another explanation for this. Either way, it's the reason why I'll never drink or touch that shit again.
I worked at a hospital during the late night shifts about 5 years ago. I was an aide where I would constantly check up on patients who needed assistance by bringing them food and water if a nurse wasn't available. It's not a hard job, but it could be somewhat of a hassle going back and forth to help people. This one particular night, I had to work overtime as the other aide had called out sick, meaning I was the only aide on duty. My boss had told me to go get a stretcher from the basement of the hospital as a 16-year-old patient had came in that got hit by a damn train. The basement of our hospital is where all the laundry and extra supplies are kept in case we needed them. I hated going down there, simply because it was rarely used and it gave me the creeps, but it couldn't go against what my boss said. So I take the elevator down to the basement and start looking for a stretcher in one of the rooms. When I finally got one, I started walking back over to the elevator as quickly as I could, when I hear laughing clear as day toward the back of the basement. From what I remember, it sounded like a woman, and I thought that it could have been a patient or one of my coworkers playing a sick prank. The only source of light on was a dimly lit yellow light in the center of the room, so I couldn't see anything beyond that. I practically pressed the button up so fast you could swear my arms were spring-loaded. Needless to say, I bring the stretcher back up to the emergency room and see all of the staff up there. When I told my coworker about my encounter, her eyes went wild and told me that she saw a woman pass the front desk and headed toward the basement of the hospital. She told me she didn't want to say anything as she figured she was a visitor. That night, we told our boss and we reviewed the footage. The camera revealed a woman who looked to be middle-aged opening a door that led into the basement. She was not a pleasant-looking woman. To give a better description, she had long, messy hair with ripped clothes, almost homeless. This is where things get weird. The camera revealed her descending into the basement and never coming back out. However, she was never found down there, which makes me wonder if there are any hidden rooms in that basement. It still gives me chills. I recently graduated from nursing at a college in Jalisco back in the 70s. I was 21 at the time. The hospital where I worked at was really creepy, especially the top floor, as no one ever wanted to go up there alone. My work colleagues would tell me all kinds of stories that happened up there. Everything from a murder that has taken place to ghost and paranormal sightings. One day, as usual, I would always get on the bus and enter my shift at around 3 p.m. I start my usual assisting on the patients, getting them anything they needed, etc. One night, a woman was in labor and I took care of her baby girl. I put her in the labor room where all the rest of the babies were. The baby started to cry, so I decided to go upstairs and warm some milk for her. At this point, all of my colleagues had gone for the night, so I had to go up alone. I slowly went up to the elevator and pressed the button to go to the top floor while gathering my thoughts and trying to relax. The doors to the elevator finally opened and everything looked so eerie and was so quiet. Or so I thought. I walked over to the kitchen area to heat up a bottle of milk for the baby girl who was just born. After I heated up the bottle for the baby, I walked past several rooms to get to the elevator doors. And that's when I heard someone coughing in one of the rooms. I now realized that I wasn't alone. I quickly ran over to the elevator doors and punched the button to open the door. I turned around and saw the doorknob to where I heard the coughing jiggle. I started frantically punching the elevator door for it to open. Thankfully, it finally opened and I turned around and saw a black figure standing in the hallway from the dimly lit light. I never once went up to the top floor alone ever again, and if I did, it was with someone.